Hello dears. Today I wanted to talk to you about a sensitive but necessary subject, the issue of female modesty as a golden mean and how to obtain it. This particular video is going to talk about the theoretical groundwork and the spiritual ideas behind this standard. The reason I'm making this video is because we are seeing in traditionally minded communities quite a surge of new members or people interested in a more traditional way of life. And this poses a particular problem for Orthodox Roman Catholics, Catholics of any sort really. With the new interest, we have to be indifferent to our newfound coolness, so to speak, as people are becoming red-pilled, which in my personal opinion, red-pilling is simply people becoming aware that our human nature is in fact fallen. That's how I would personally define the red pill. It's just a very elementary teaching in our church. So we have this challenge of being indifferent to becoming fashionable, conservatism being the new countercultural, as some pundits like to call it. But at the same time, we need to be enthusiastic about people becoming more interested in the faith and in cultural traditions. We need to understand where they're coming from, that they're revolting against the sex negativity of third wave feminism, which is definitely an attack on the natural law. It's good for them to be offended by the negativity towards what is natural. They are revolting against the strict injunctions of Islam, which is also a good thing. So we have this duty to these newly interested persons to be very gentle with them in cases where they are a bit weak, but also to be very active in promoting their growth in the faith. And modesty is one of those very touchy issues, especially since you have the sex negative feminists who have made women want to embrace their feminine submissive qualities in their relationships with men. You have Islam, which wishes to so objectify women that basically there is no ideological difference in Islam between the bikini and the burqa. The bikini is public property, the burqa is private property as far as they are concerned, at least the strict adherents in that faith. So we have quite a problem, and I'm hoping to provide perhaps a theoretical groundwork on which to tackle this problem. Because if some young men do come into a old Latin mass wearing baseball caps, we have a duty to say, it's so good to see a new face. See that hook on the pew? That's where you can hang your cap during the service. If a young woman arrives at the mass, we must be very gentle with her. Maybe point out, oh, there's a basket full of mantillas if you would like to use one during the service. We have to remember that the usual secular cultural norms we could rely on to enforce modesty are now non-existent. And that for us as traditionalists, aka Catholics, we have to more invite people rather than admonish them. We have to instruct them very gently and very charitably. Another point in why I'm making this video is that modesty, I think, is very misunderstood. A lot of neo-Catholics want to eschew it altogether. Like, it's scrupulous, it's judgmental, let's get rid of it. And then, of course, there are traditionalists who obsess over it because it's easier to moderate externals than to strive towards interior spiritual perfection. And I do not say this to put myself forward as some glad trad looking down on sad, mad, and rad trads. Honestly, throughout most of my life, I've probably fallen into the three latter categories more often than the first one. Okay, that's why this video is being made. Now, whom is this video for? I'm calling it a video geared towards female modesty because I do not feel qualified to talk about male modesty. I think that is a matter of fraternal correction, and I'll let the men handle it. That said, can men watch this video? Well, if you are a priest or in some case an instructor who is in charge of spiritually directing women, you might find a woman's point of view on this issue interesting. If you are a father, a guardian, someone who is in charge of protecting and raising women, this video could be for you. If you are a man whose opinion has been solicited, maybe you're a blogger who has been asked to give your point of view on modesty, or maybe you're just a popular guy at school and some people have legitimately solicited your advice on the matter. Perhaps this video is for you as well. If you are a man and you don't fall into any of these categories, I think you should consider a work by Saint Jose Maria Escriva. He wrote a work called The 17 Signs of a Lack of Humility, and while I would not recommend his teachings across the board, that is a very helpful one. And the fourth point he makes is that if you give your opinion when it has not been asked or charity does not absolutely call for it, it's a sign that you lack humility. So if you're a man and you don't fall into one of those three categories, I don't think this video is for you. And considering that I'm going to talk about articles of female clothing and things that perhaps she shouldn't show, I'm going to talk about that very freely in a way I wouldn't normally do in a mixed group. So you've been forewarned. The first thing to do, obviously, is to define our terms. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, modesty has three definitions. I think the first and third are relevant to this topic. The first being the quality or state of being unassuming in the estimation of one's abilities. This does have an impact on how we dress and carry ourselves. A woman who dresses like a princess all the time, even if it is a dress that covers everything, is not being modest. She's really been a bit pompous. That's what we would think of any woman who wore a white ball gown to someone else's wedding. That would be an immodest thing to do. The third definition, behavior, manner, or appearance intended to avoid impropriety or indecency. And, well, that third definition is, I think, only moderately helpful, because it is possible to be objectively immodest without being subjectively immodest. This is something that I think mad trads especially need to remember, because I see them getting so angry at young women who are wearing something inappropriate without remembering the distinction of objective and subjective guilt. And for anyone who needs an example of that, objectively speaking, Jeans are designed to, if they are fashionable jeans, mind you, they are designed to enhance a woman's posterior. This is something that if you read fashion articles, if you watch Oprah, for example, or talk to a well-educated sales clerk at American Eagle stores, for example, they will tell you that's what a good pair of jeans is supposed to do. It's supposed to enhance your rear end. So objectively speaking, fashionable jeans are not something we should wear. But subjectively speaking, jeans are so prevalent that there are many girls that put on a pair without thinking twice, who would be a bit abashed if they realized what those jeans were supposed to do. So, attacking a 15-year-old girl for wearing a pair of jeans as if she was trying to provoke interest in that part of her body, it's not fair. And, well, that's part of not breaking the bruised reed, isn't it? So there we are for mainstream definitions of modesty. Father John Hardon of the Society of Jesus, who wrote the only catechism we had when the Vatican was neglecting its duty on that score, also wrote a pocket Catholic dictionary. And his definition of modesty goes like this: the virtue that moderates all the internal and external movements and appearance of a person according to his or her endowments, possessions, and station of life. 4 virtues are commonly included under modesty: humility, studiousness, and the 2 kinds of external modesty, namely of dress and general behavior. I really recommend that Catholic dictionary, by the way. It's brilliant. So that's why it is important to talk about modesty, because it is linked to humility, and that's the greatest of the 7 virtues. We really have to focus on that. But if we want to get into more concrete or a priori arguments concerning modesty, ite ad domam, in the Summa Theologica, the second part of the second part, question 169. You can find it on the internet. St. Thomas Aquinas first gives us a good indicator of modesty in a practical sense when it talks about comparison with the customs among whom we live. General custom is going to be a good indicator of what is modest and immodest. And this is where the relativity of modesty does make an entrance into the argument. There are many women who are succeeding in being modest nowadays simply because even though they dress like everyone else, their necklines are a few centimeters higher, or their hemlines are a few centimeters lower, or the fabric isn't quite as tight as it could be. Honestly, that's probably enough to put women in the realm of modesty right there, that relativity. However, because we are supposed to always be excelling in our spiritual growth, this isn't exactly sufficient, especially since the customs of a culture can be corrupted, and the idea of being Catholics is to be salt of the earth, not just another mashed potato. We're supposed to be anchoring, let's say, the Overton window, because it's always moving. What is acceptable is always shifting according to our concupiscence. So, unfortunately, it is still necessary to have a discussion on modesty. The other aspect of modesty concerning our actions and our internal disposition. St. Thomas Aquinas speaks of the lack of moderation in the use of things, the external things, which arise from the inordinate attachment of the user, the pleasure that we get out of things. I remember once a young woman was talking to a chaplain at the place where I attended school, and she said, well, who's a good example of modesty? Where can I really find a good example of what it means to be modest? And I was dressed a certain way that day, and the chaplain actually pointed me out as an example. This young woman looked at me and actually teared up. Granted, I did look a bit frumpy that day, to be honest. I really did, but she shouldn't have teared up. That was a sign that she was too attached to showing the beauty of her body through dress, that she actually was in tears over the idea that she couldn't do that anymore. I understand why she would want to, but there is a concupiscence in women arising from being too inwardly attached to dressing the way we like, and that is an urge that we do have to restrain. Now there is another element, charity and female chivalry in the way we dress. A woman has to acknowledge the effect of her dress on men, as well as the effect that it has on her inwardly. We have to recognize a man's visual weakness the same way a man recognizes our physical weakness. If a woman was having trouble with a particular heavy load, and a man said, it's her own fault, she could lift weights, she could work out, I have no duty to assist her. That's rather the same way a woman is treating a man when she says, he can avert his eyes, it's his problem, not mine. I think it's evident that both those attitudes are unkind and unchivalrous. Remember, we have a duty to be chivalrous as women. The other unkindness in modest dress is the unkindness towards more matronly women. Giving their husbands a reminder of what their wives used to look like is unkind towards her, which is probably why most of the slut shaming, as it's called, has always come from other women. It's always been other women really taking the charge in seeking to regulate the way other women dress, because it is a competition amongst us. It is a coin of power that we use, namely the beauty of our bodies. Because, however, that kind of social shaming has been debilitated in our modern age, we really have to be prompted by our own kindness towards other women when we think about how we dress, in not wanting to show them up, as well as in not wanting to disturb a man's peace. Now, if we accept the idea of modesty as a consensus, if modesty is some kind of consensus hovering around a relative standard in the custom of dress, there is not only ostentation, there is also a deficiency in dress. We have to remember that modesty is a golden mean between ostentation and deficiency. The deficiency is where perhaps trads, more traditionally minded people, have to look at themselves. So we'll go back to St. Thomas, shall we? Now, St. Thomas said that there can be a deficiency in two ways. The first would be through neglect. Quoting Aristotle, he says, it is a mark of effeminacy to let one's cloak trail on the ground to avoid the trouble of lifting it up. So there can be some sloth or laziness in deficiency in dress. I have to admit, even if I wasn't actually being lazy, the frumpiness with which I dressed earlier in my life looked lazy. The lack of wearing the proper size, a size that's too big, or not trying to have a tailored outfit at all, it looks like sloth. And sometimes it is sloth and sometimes it isn't. The more serious deficiency, however, is of course the internal deficiency, actually seeking glory from lack of attention to outward attire, taking pride in not being fashionable, in not wearing things that are becoming to you or pleasing to others. It's these are two things that I have personally been guilty of in my life, which is why I think I have something special to add to the conversation. I'm trying to find my own mean by leaving deficiency in dress as opposed to ostentation in dress. So I'm trying to meet, I believe, the majority of women in the middle, and perhaps I can offer something different in that respect. So in the second video I'm going to make, there will be more concrete tips, things that I try to do to both be modest and to give concessions to the modern world. Let me, before I end this abstract argument, I will lay down the problems that are going to arise in the coming video. Modesty is a social mores, and no one person can concretely say what that is. The Vatican did some time ago lay down some very specific guidelines for modest dress, and of course saints like Saint Pio had their own preferences, but even traditionalist priests and commentators have acknowledged that because we have been born into a different culture and generation, we can't say that those standards are absolute. There are concessions to be made. So the fact is too that in different cultures, men are provoked by different things. No one cares about seeing a woman's ears or ankles anymore. We're going to have to take that into consideration. So I'm hoping that this video will actually provoke other videos from women who are interested in obtaining modesty, because this is not a one-woman show. I'm going to give my opinion. I'm going to put in my special tips in the upcoming video. But all in all, I hope I've made the case for why traditionalists need to regard the topic, for why people new to traditionalism need to regard the topic, and why we need to approach the matter very gently and very diplomatically, not for the sake of diplomacy, but for the sake of doing justice to people who have been betrayed by the culture at large. Thank you so much, and God bless you.